Pilot Podcasts. A sitting U.S. senator, the world's richest man, and the Pope walk into a debate about artificial intelligence, and somehow they all end up on the same side. Not on the solution, mind you, but on the alarm. Today, we're breaking down 3 of the most consequential AI proposals happening right now. Bernie Sanders' plan to seize half the stock of OpenAI and Anthropic, Elon Musk's vision of a world where nobody needs to work, and the Vatican's formal ethical framework for AI, including a warning that no machine should ever be allowed to take a human life. By the end of this episode, you'll understand what's actually being proposed, why it matters for your economic future, and what it tells us about who really gets to shape this technology. Joining me to dig into all of this is someone who has been tracking these debates closely. Let's get into it.
So let's start with the thing that dropped just this week because it's genuinely wild. Bernie Sanders published an op-ed in the New York Times on June 1st, announcing plans to introduce what he's calling the American AI Sovereign Wealth Fund Act.
Right, and the headline number here is 50%. He wants to take 50% of the stock of major AI companies.
Exactly. And it's not a tax on profits, it's not a regulatory fee, it's a one-time levy paid in stock, not cash, targeting companies like OpenAI, Anthropic, and xAI. The government would then place those shares into a federally managed sovereign wealth fund.
So the government literally becomes a co-owner of these companies.
Co-owner with voting rights. Sanders wrote that the federal government would have the power, through its voting shares and equal representation on each company's board, to block decisions that hurt citizens and push for policies that help them. That's a direct quote from his op-ed.
That is a significant amount of power. What's the argument he's making for why this is necessary?
So his office released a report warning that AI could eliminate nearly 100 million American jobs over the coming decade. And his core argument is that corporations are already using this as a selling point to investors. He specifically called out Amazon, Walmart, United Health Group, and JP Morgan Chase as companies openly telling investors that AI will allow them to slash payrolls, while those same companies are posting tens of billions in profits and paying CEOs $25, $35 million or more.
So the pitch is basically, AI was built on everyone's creative output, books, journalism, scientific research, code, and the public deserves a cut of what it generates.
That's exactly the framing. Sanders said the fund would guarantee that the trillions of dollars potentially generated by AI are used to improve the lives of all of us, not simply to make the richest people in the world even richer. And he envisions the proceeds flowing first as direct payments to Americans and eventually financing universal access to healthcare, education, and housing.
Okay, but I have to ask, what's the pushback? Because a 50% stock seizure sounds like something that would send every tech company's legal team into full panic mode.
Yeah, the criticism from Reason magazine was pretty pointed. They noted that Sanders cites Norway's government pension fund and the Alaska Permanent Fund as models. But here's the thing. Both of those funds are financed by oil and gas revenue. And Sanders has spent his entire career opposing fossil fuels. So there's a real irony there.
Wait, he's using oil fund models to justify an AI fund? That's a pretty significant contradiction.
It is. And Alaska's Permanent Fund, which is the one that actually does direct payments to residents, is an $86 billion fund that fluctuates year to year because the government also pulls money from it for other purposes. So the model he's pointing to has its own complications.
Still, the broader political context here is important, right? This isn't happening in a vacuum. There's a lot of AI legislation flowing around right now.
Massive amounts. According to Baker Botts, over 1,000 AI-related bills were introduced across US states in 2025 alone, with over 700 the year before. And at the federal level, the Trump administration has taken the opposite approach, revoking Biden-era AI safety requirements and pushing to preempt state AI laws through a December 2025 executive order.
So you've got states trying to regulate, the federal government trying to deregulate, and now Sanders trying to nationalize ownership. It's a 3-way tug of war.
And Sanders isn't just doing the wealth fund bill. According to Legislator, which tracks every AI bill in Congress, he also introduced the AI Data Center Moratorium Act back in March, calling for a pause on new data center construction while Congress studies the energy, water, and climate toll of the AI build-out. He's been the loudest step on the brakes voice in the Senate.
Okay, so that's the Sanders lane. Now let's talk about Elon Musk, because his position is genuinely baffling to me on the surface.
It really is. So Musk posted on X that, and I'm quoting directly, universal high income via checks issued by the federal government is the best way to deal with unemployment caused by AI. He's been very deliberate about the distinction between universal basic income and what he calls universal high income.
What's the difference?
So UBI, as it's traditionally understood, is a modest floor, enough to survive on. What Musk is describing is something much bigger. He said at the Viva Technology Conference in Paris that in a benign scenario, probably none of us will have a job, and there will be universal high income, not universal basic income, universal high income. There'll be no shortage of goods or services. He's imagining a world of genuine abundance, not just a safety net.
He literally called it kind of sounds like heaven at one point.
He did. He told Joe Rogan that everyone has abundance, everyone has excellent medical care, everyone has whatever goods and services they want. And he said he puts the probability of that benign scenario at around 80%. The other 20% is, in his words, all bets are off where we're in deep trouble.
That's a pretty wide range of outcomes to be comfortable with.
Right. And here's the contradiction that the Washington Post flagged. Musk, through his oversight of Doge, once sought to cut $2 trillion from the federal budget. But his universal high-income proposal would be a radical expansion of the social safety net that would dramatically exceed Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security combined. Those are two completely opposite positions.
So he wants to gut government spending and also create the biggest government spending program in history at the same time.
Essentially, yes. His argument is that it won't require traditional funding because AI and robotics will produce goods and services far in excess of the increase in the money supply, so there will not be inflation. That's his direct quote.
And economists are not exactly buying that, right?
Johns Hopkins economist Steve Hanke engaged with this directly. He pointed to the quantity theory of money, the idea that money supply times velocity equals price level times real output. Musk's logic relies on real output growing so fast that more money in the system doesn't cause inflation. But Hanke's caution is that the real economy rarely behaves like a clean equation. Velocity is unstable, and productivity booms historically don't map reliably to stable prices.
So the math might not work the way Musk thinks it does.
That's the concern. And a research paper from the Singapore University of Social Sciences, published in May 2025, made a similar point. That basic income is more appropriately viewed as a component within a broader policy framework, not a singular solution. It needs to be paired with investments in education, skills development, and active labor market policies.
What's interesting to me is that Musk isn't alone among tech leaders on this. It's not just him.
Not at all. Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei has called for similar public relief measures, including potentially UBI, writing that eventually our current economic setup will no longer make sense and there will be a need for a broader societal conversation about how the economy should be organized. And Sam Altman at OpenAI has moved from championing UBI to now talking about collective public ownership of AI. He said in a podcast interview that any version of the future he can get excited about means everybody's got to participate in the upside.
So you have Sanders coming from the left, Musk coming from wherever Musk is politically, and the CEOs of the two biggest AI labs all pointing toward the same general direction. That's a remarkable convergence.
It really is. And Sanders actually noted in his op-ed that OpenAI itself has proposed a public wealth fund giving every citizen a stake in AI-driven growth, and that Anthropic's CEO endorsed a similar concept. So he's not just citing left-wing economists, he's citing the companies he wants to tax.
That's a fascinating rhetorical move. Okay, let's bring in the third voice in this conversation, because I think it adds a dimension that the economic debate often misses. The Vatican.
So the Catholic Church has actually been monitoring AI for more than 40 years, according to the US Conference of Catholic Bishops. But the most significant recent document is called Antiqua et Nova, Latin for ancient and new, released in January 2025 and approved by Pope Francis himself.
What does a Vatican document on AI actually say? I'm genuinely curious.
It's 117 paragraphs covering AI's impact on education, work, health, relationships, and warfare. One of the most striking lines is that Pope Francis said, the very use of the word intelligence in connection to AI can prove misleading, and that AI should not be seen as an artificial form of human intelligence, but as a product of it.
That's actually a really important distinction. AI as a product of human intelligence, not a replacement for it.
And that framing has real implications for the ownership debate. If AI is a product of collective human creativity, built on books, journalism, scientific research, code, then the argument that the public deserves a stake in it becomes much harder to dismiss. The Vatican document also warned that AI risks aggravating discrimination, poverty, the digital divide, and social inequalities.
And then there's the warfare piece, which is where the Vatican gets really specific.
This is where it gets urgent. Pope Francis warned in 2024 that no machine should ever choose to take the life of a human being. And then just last month, the new Pope Leo XIV released his first encyclical called Magnifica Humanitas, Magnificent Humanity, on May 25th, which emphasized safeguarding the human person in the time of artificial intelligence, specifically including AI in warfare.
So this is a continuity of position across two popes.
Exactly. Pope Leo wrote that the decision to use lethal force cannot be delegated to opaque or automated processes, but must remain under effective, self-aware, and responsible human control. And Human Rights Watch noted that 130 states have now expressed support for a legally binding instrument prohibiting or regulating autonomous weapons systems.
130 states. That's not a fringe position.
Not at all. And in June, which is right now, states are meeting at the United Nations to discuss for the first time how to address the opportunities and challenges posed by AI in military contexts. Then they meet again in Geneva in November to consider whether to formally launch treaty negotiations. The Vatican's encyclical landed right in the middle of that diplomatic moment.
The Vatican also formed a new commission specifically on AI ethics, right?
Yes, the Holy See established a dedicated commission tasked with guiding ethical AI development worldwide. The framing is that technological progress aligns with human dignity, social justice, and the common good. And the document Antiqua et Nova was released the day after International Holocaust Remembrance Day, which was not an accident. It said the atrocities committed throughout history are enough to raise deep concerns about the potential abuses of AI.
That timing is deliberate and sobering. It's essentially saying, we've seen what happens when powerful tools are misused at scale.
Precisely. And the document is careful not to be purely negative. It says technological progress is part of God's plan for creation, and that AI can contribute positively to the human vocation when used in ways that respect human dignity. But it also says, like any tool, AI is an extension of human power, and humanity's past actions provide clear warnings.
I want to go back to something you said earlier about the cross-ideological convergence, because I think that's the most underreported part of this whole story. You've got a Democratic Socialist senator, a libertarian-leaning billionaire, and the Catholic Church all raising the same alarm.
And they're doing it from completely different starting points. Sanders is coming from a labor and inequality framework. Musk is coming from a techno-optimist framework where abundance is inevitable and the question is just distribution. And the Vatican is coming from a human dignity framework, the idea that what makes us human cannot be outsourced to an algorithm.
And yet they all end up at roughly the same place. AI wealth needs to be shared, and AI power needs to be constrained.
That convergence is rare in politics. When you see people this ideologically different agreeing on the stakes, even if not the solutions, it usually means the stakes are real. McKinsey models cited by GovFact suggest that by 2030, automation could displace a significant portion of the workforce in sectors previously insulated from mechanization, creative arts, law, administration. These aren't just factory jobs anymore.
And that's what makes the Sanders proposal interesting even to people who disagree with it. It's not just about taxing tech companies, it's about who has a seat at the table when decisions get made.
Right. The voting rights piece is actually the most radical part of his proposal. It's not just revenue, it's governance. The public would have equal representation on the boards of OpenAI, Anthropic, xAI. That's a fundamentally different relationship between citizens and technology companies than anything we've seen before.
And the timing is interesting too, because Anthropic filed confidentially for an IPO the same day Sanders' op-ed ran. And SpaceX, which acquired xAI in a record merger, filed its S1 targeting what would be the largest IPO in history.
The irony of that timing is almost too perfect. These companies are about to become publicly traded, and Sanders is essentially saying, well, if you're going public, the actual public should own half of you.
Let me push back on one thing, though. Critics would say that government ownership of tech companies could stifle the very innovation that makes AI valuable in the first place. Is that a fair concern?
It's a legitimate concern. Reason magazine's critique was that Sanders doesn't fully grapple with how government board representation could slow decision-making or introduce political considerations into technical choices. And the funding mechanism, a one-time stock seizure, is unprecedented. There's no real playbook for how this would work in practice.
So the idea might be right, but the mechanism is untested.
That's probably the fairest way to put it. And Musk's critics would say the same thing about universal high income. The vision is compelling, but the economics are unproven. Johns Hopkins' Steve Hanks' point is that you can't just assume productivity growth will outpace inflation. History doesn't support that assumption reliably.
Bill Gates had a more measured take on all of this, right? He wasn't going as far as Musk.
Gates told Jimmy Fallon that AI will make it possible to consider a 2 or 3 day work week. He said that in terms of making things, moving things, growing food, those will be basically solved problems. So he's optimistic, but he's not predicting the end of work entirely. He thinks humans will reserve some tasks for themselves.
A 3-day work week sounds pretty good, honestly.
It does. But Musk's deeper question is actually the one that lingers. He said at Viva Technology, if a computer and robots can do everything better than you, does your life have meaning? That's not an economic question. That's a philosophical one. And it's the question the Vatican is also asking, just from a different angle.
That's where the Vatican's framing becomes really powerful. They're not just talking about jobs or money, they're asking what it means to be human in a world where machines can replicate human output.
And the document Antiqua et Nova is explicit about this. It says AI raises fundamental questions about ethical responsibility and human safety, and that this new situation has prompted many people to reflect on what it means to be human and the role of humanity in the world. That's not a niche theological concern, that's the central question of our moment.
So when you step back from all of this, Sanders, Musk, the Vatican, what's the through line?
Here's what this really comes down to. AI is generating enormous value, and the question of who captures that value and who controls the decisions that shape it is the defining political and ethical question of the next decade. Sanders wants public ownership. Musk wants public abundance. The Vatican wants human dignity to remain non-negotiable. Those aren't mutually exclusive.
And the fact that over 1,000 AI bills were introduced in U.S. states in a single year tells you that lawmakers at every level are feeling the urgency, even if Washington hasn't figured out a coherent federal response yet.
The regulatory landscape right now is genuinely chaotic. You've got states like California, Texas, and Illinois enacting their own AI laws, the Trump administration trying to preempt them, and Congress tracking 32 separate AI bills simultaneously. The only thing that's actually become law so far is the Take It Down Act, a ban on AI-generated non-consensual intimate imagery. That's important, but it's a narrow slice of the problem.
So we have the most transformative technology in modern history, and the most significant legislation we've passed so far is about deepfakes.
That's the gap. And it's why proposals like Sanders's, even if you think the mechanism is flawed, are worth taking seriously. Because the alternative is that the decisions about who benefits from AI get made entirely by the people who built it, without any democratic input at all.
And that's the stake-setting statement right there. This isn't abstract. If AI eliminates 100 million jobs over the next decade, as Sanders' office projects, and the wealth flows entirely to a handful of companies and investors, that's a social rupture on a scale we haven't seen since the Industrial Revolution.
OpenAI actually used that exact comparison in their April policy proposals, referencing the transition to the industrial age and the New Deal as points of comparison for what's on the horizon. When the company building the technology is invoking the New Deal, you know the scale of disruption being anticipated is enormous.
So here's what I keep coming back to. A senator, a billionaire, and the Pope rarely agree on anything. But they're all saying the same thing. This technology is too powerful and too consequential to be left entirely in the hands of a small number of private actors.
And the mechanisms they're proposing, public ownership, universal income, ethical governance frameworks, treaty-level regulation of autonomous weapons, those are all different answers to the same question. How do we make sure AI serves humanity rather than a subset of it?
The Vatican put it simply. Like any tool, AI is an extension of human power, and humanity's past actions provide clear warnings. That's not pessimism, that's just history.
And the actionable insight here is that these debates are happening right now, in Congress, at the UN, in papal encyclicals. The decisions being made in the next few years will shape who benefits from AI for generations. That's not hyperbole, that's the actual stakes.
So what should someone listening to this actually do with all of this?
Pay attention to the ownership question, not just the capability question. Most AI coverage focuses on what AI can do, and that's important. But the more consequential question is who owns it, who governs it, and who benefits from it. Those are political questions, and they get answered through political processes, which means your voice actually matters here.
And watch the convergence. When Bernie Sanders and Elon Musk and the Pope are all pointing in the same direction, even from opposite starting points, that's a signal worth taking seriously.
Exactly. The disagreement is about the solution. The agreement is about the problem. And that's actually a more hopeful place to start than it might seem.
We started this episode by saying a senator, a billionaire, and the Pope walked into a debate about AI. Turns out, the punchline isn't a joke, it's a warning. And the question they're all asking is the same one you should be asking. When AI reshapes the economy, who decided that? Was it you, or was it decided for you? That's the conversation happening right now, and it's one worth joining. Thanks for listening to Copilot Podcasts.